Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video of myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 14th of January 2025. I'm sorry that there's probably going to be quite a lot of content today. Sorry, not sorry. Just there have been 2 extra lives with Jonathan Fink scheduled and all my usual content. And if I don't do my usual content, there will just be an unmanageable amount of news to try and communicate you tomorrow. Because just look at how much stuff there is to talk about in the geopolitical domain today. It's a phenomenal amount. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, the Russian-friendly incumbent Zoran Milanovic has been re-elected as the president of Croatia. So Milanovic's re-election is largely symbolic position, serves as a setback for the Prime Minister Andrej Plenković, whose government was recently embroiled in a corruption scandal implicating a former health minister. Now, do I have any more on this? No, I think I do somewhere. Some of the comments from Milanovic are pretty problematic. He is very clearly not a fan of Ukraine. So that's a problem, although he's already the president. And Croatia have been helping out. They have done a number of things. There are these tanks that have come over from Croatia that are being done up by Rheinmetall. So it's a shame that he's got in, but not wholly unexpected. I think even he got in with a 77% mandate. So that is a pretty sizable majority there for him. The future of European and global security hinges on the outcome of the war in Ukraine, says NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. During a debate with members of European Parliament, Rutte stated that, quote, peace will not last if Putin gets his way in Ukraine because he will then press ahead. And absolutely there. So peace will not last if the war ends with a deal where Putin, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un and the regime in Tehran are high-fiving each other, feeling empowered. So I'm convinced that peace can only last if Ukraine comes to the table from a position of strength. For this, it needs our continued help, more weapons and faster so it can defend itself better and negotiate a good deal for Ukraine, for Europe and for the world, he said. Absolutely agree 100%. Indeed, Edward Hunter Christie has got a thread here on similar topics. So led by Finland and Estonia, allies are waking up to more seriously to Russia's campaign of sabotage against Europe. In fact, let's give a precursor here with what I shared with you in the live stream with Jonathan Fink. Philip O'Brien has written a piece for The Atlantic that is called A Wider War Has Already Started in Europe. And I like this, the idea that it's not a case that we need to declare war on Russia, but we need to declare that Russia is waging war on us. And we need to communicate that with our populations. And I talked about that at some length with Jonathan Fink. I really feel strongly that we're not doing a good enough job, our mainstream media and our politicians, of saying exactly what Russia is doing, exactly what Russian propagandists are saying on national television about us, the Anglo-Saxons, Europeans, Americans, so that our populations don't realize that the Russians are waging war on us. They're involved in an information, a cyber, and to some degree more conventional war on us, setting fire to things, sabotage war, cutting cables, etc., etc. So Philip O'Brien says in his latest pieces out in The Atlantic, Europe better realise soon that Russia is fighting a war and it involves them. Here's one of the key paragraphs, and I really like this paragraph. The inability to describe acts of war as acts of war is part of a culture of distortion and denial regarding the subject of state-sponsored violence. Over generations, policymakers have created many subclasses of conflict: Cold Wars, police actions, hybrid wars, cyber wars. Different euphemisms serve different purposes. Putin prefers special military operation because he doesn't want to publicly admit that he is waging a brutal war on Ukrainians. Many in Europe avoid describing Russia's sabotage campaign outside Ukraine as war because they'd rather not have to do anything in response. So that's a backdrop to which I'm going to read through this thread by Edward Hunter Christie. Led by Finland and Estonia, allies are waking up more seriously to Russia's campaign of sabotage across Europe. The tone is the right one, and the responses are beginning to take shape. Today's press conference is well worth watching. There is a new joint political statement by all of NATO's Baltic Sea littoral states: Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Sweden, and Germany. A new NATO operation has been launched, the Baltic Sentry, multi-domain, maritime, air, etc., open-ended in response to the sabotage acts of the 25th of December, aiming at, quote, focused deterrence through the Baltic Sea and to counter destabilizing acts like those observed last month. This comes in addition to the earlier activities launched through the Joint Expeditionary Force, JEF, with UK support to Baltic Sea allies. It also comes in parallel with other solidarity measures through the EU and bilaterally. My commentary now, as my being Edward Hunter Christie, at the wider strategic level, it's quite obvious that allies have the Russian shadow fleet increasingly in their sights. New economic sanctions have been enacted by the United States Treasury recently. The crucial issue is, of course, the choice and enforcement of measures to prevent acts of sabotage, notably if such attempts are made outside of territorial waters. Allies, being good European states, are openly keen to ensure that and to ensure others that international law shall be followed. However, as President Stubb of Finland has indicated, consultations with government's legal experts are ongoing and will co-determine what measures allied states will feel comfortable taking and how they will then justify them. The obvious areas of interest for legal analysis is to consider precedents regarding counter-piracy operations, not in a context of armed conflict, or LOACIHL assessing that Russia is actually attacking our nations. I'm not sure what those acronyms stand for. The saboteur ships in the Baltic Sea are not warships and also do not have onboard weapons. They have not been used so far, touch wood, to do anything kinetic except ripping up cables. This makes them comparable to pirates for now. Previous counter-piracy operations have allowed NATO ships to board vessels, arrest and detain persons suspected of taking part in piracy, and use force to stop a pirate vessel or intervene in a hijacking, including in international waters. I guess you do that, then you capture these people, then you interrogate them, and then you find out that whether or not they are acting on behalf of Russia or a state. And if they are doing that, then it goes from piracy to something more serious. But it's really important that something does happen. He finishes, it is certainly important for allies to impose upon all ships, regardless of flag, the principle of the ship's that a ship's crew, if suspected of criminal damage or critical infrastructure, may be arrested, held liable for, and prosecuted for that criminal damage. Any other principle is clearly absurd. Ships involved in such attacks and their cargoes should also be impounded, though this would largely require an LOACIHL line of reasoning. One could take the view that it must be lawful for states to deny an adversary the means of repeat attacks and the imposition of economic costs. IHL, probably international humanitarian law. LOAC, not sure. Let's have a quick look. LOAC. Manual, of the law of armed conflict. So that is law of armed conflict and international humanitarian law. So they will define how we react. Fascinating, but we're starting to see a ramping up of realization that Russia is engaged in war, is waging war on us. What is our response? Sweden is neither at war or at peace, says the Prime Minister, as warships are sent to the Baltic Sea. So Ulf Kristersson says a hostile intent cannot be ruled out as increased surveillance follows suspected cable sabotage. So this is like kind of hedging your bets, but at least it's going forward. It's not just we're not at war, we're somewhere between war and peace. We're not quite at war, but really we functionally are, I would argue. I mean, Sweden, like many other allied nations, are providing everything other than troops on the ground to Ukraine to wage a conventional war against Russia. We're involved in cyber war directly, involved in information war directly, involved in sabotage directly. Think of all the issues with drones surveilling and, somewhere like Germany and UK, where we've had packages exploding in DHL warehouses, etc. So, sabotage, espionage, political warfare, information warfare, super important. Economic warfare, trade, sanctions, etc. Every element of warfare other than having our individuals on the ground in Ukraine. And there are probably special forces of all of our countries involved in Ukraine, almost certainly the UK, and I'd imagine the US, but certainly UK special forces are there. So we are functionally at war, and it's taking a long time for nations to admit that more formally. The King of Sweden, Carl Gustaf XIV, in a rare interview said the security situation today is much more serious than during the Cold War, and says it's important to support Ukraine and invest in Swedish defence. Absolutely 100%. Now, Sweden is joining NATO's new defensive maritime mission in the Baltic Sea area after the undersea cables were either cut or there have been attempts. Another one has been found today that I don't think has been cut, but there's like a 100-kilometer drag mux to try and cut it, and it's thought that it's the same vessel Yiping 3. Sweden's Navy will deploy 3 ships, its Coast Guard 4, and the Swedish Air Force will contribute a Saab 340 AEW and C. So one of these planes that actually 2 of them were supposed to be going to Ukraine. I was wondering whether they hadn't found a way to Ukraine because they must be involved in training. You can't just give that over and say, there you go and use it. That'll take like a year of training on that. So that could be why the Ukrainians aren't utilizing it at the moment. Now, BBC is reporting that NATO has launched Baltic Sentry, this mission to protect the undersea cables. That's all going on at the moment, and we've seen that Sweden is getting heavily involved there. Now, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia have appealed to the European Commission to lower the price cap on Russian oil. So this is part of the economic war, Reuters reports. The measure aims to reduce Moscow's revenues as it continues its war in Ukraine. The cap set by the G7 countries is currently $60 per barrel. Quote, measures aimed at reducing oil export revenues are crucial as they cut Russia's most important source of income, the appeal to the EU executive body states. Now, it's really important that that does get cut, but then you've got to enforce it. You know, there are loopholes at Shadow Fleet, so it has to be a kind of a universal approach to closing loopholes and, you know, enacting these sanctions. 10 EU countries, including Sweden, Denmark, Finland and Poland, push for sanctions on all Russian gas, both pipeline and LNG, liquefied natural gas. As the EU discusses its 16th sanctions package, proposals include bans on metal imports, expanded trade restrictions and more. So this is looking good. If all of this happens, then Russia is facing stricter and stricter sanctions upon it from more and more sources. And I just hope to goodness that Trump comes in and continues these efforts, because they are working. They are hurting Russia. They aren't perfect. More work needs to be done. But I think Russia is starting to really feel some economic pain. Bloomberg also writes, says Anton Gerashenko, that India plans to reject oil tankers that carry Russian oil if they're sanctioned by the US. Secondary sanctions having an effect. Reportedly, these vessels will not be allowed to discharge. An unnamed Indian official told Bloomberg that global supply of oil is sufficient, so India will be able to buy oil from others. And the increase in oil prices will not last long, although India may not be able to buy oil at the discounted price that it currently pays Russia. The official added, however, that Russia will find ways to get its barrels to India. So there will be loopholes, but there's really good news that India will be looking to carry out those sanctions to adhere to what the US Treasury Department wants to happen. Now, Poland has denied banning the Slovak delegation's flight to Moscow through Polish airspace. So the claim was that Poland stopped Fico and his delegation flying over Poland from Slovakia through to Moscow to have these meetings with Putin. Quote, we didn't refuse the flight. The Slovak side simply sent us an incomplete documents. When they were asked to complete them, they informed us about a change of route, is what the Polish say. I mean, really what happened there, I'm not sure. Now, talking of Slovakia, Fico has refused to go to Kiev. There's been this very public spat between Fico and Vladimir Zelensky, and the vice speaker of the Slovak parliament has said that Fico won't go to Kiev when he was kind of, if you like, offered out by Zelensky, you know, you need to come and see this for yourself, come to the border with me, etc., etc. Now, Zelensky has said, this is what he publicly said, which is fairly incendiary, I think, and rightfully so. It's good that Slovakia's Prime Minister Fico has finally returned from his vacation at a luxurious hotel in Vietnam and is now in Bratislava. For him personally, it must be challenging switching from living in luxury to now trying to fix his own mistakes. It was an obvious mistake for Fico to believe that his shadowy schemes with Moscow could go on indefinitely. We offered our assistance to the people of Slovakia during their adaptation to the absence of Russian gas transit, but Fico arrogantly refused. I mean, this is really, I think, escalatory, but kind of, it needs to be said. Many in Europe warned him that doing nothing and waiting was not an option. Now he's resorting to PR, lies and loud accusations to shift the blame away from himself and onto someone else. But the real problem is that he bet on Moscow, not on his own country, not on the United Europe, and certainly not on common sense. From the beginning, it was a losing bet. We hope that further diversification of energy supply sources in Europe, cooperation with the European Commission, and the implementation of President Trump's policy to increase American gas supplies very clever bringing that in, to the continent will help address the challenges caused by the short-sightedness of certain European figures. This is absolutely, as I said, incendiary, but it's spot on. This is 100% correct, right? And it needs to be said, Fitzo needs to be put in his place and told exactly what for. You get this support for the Kremlin from Slovakia, from Serbia, from Hungary, and there is a growing sense of dissatisfaction from within these countries with their own leadership. Here we see Serbia, massive protests against Vucic's authoritarian regime in Serbia. This is from a couple of days ago, I think. But, you know, this is significant and exactly, as I say, what we want to see. Here we have a drone flying over what looks like a pretty sizable crowd of protesters and dissenters concerning Vucic's regime there. Now, this was the part I was supposed to have earlier. This is a Croatian. Previously, Milanovic, the he's been re-voted in newly elected president, re-elected president, claimed that, quote, glory to Ukraine, Ukrainian national salute was used by chauvinists who killed Jews and Poles, and said Crimea would never return to Ukraine. So there you go. That's who he is. But he's back in that role. Now, Volyn exhumations, I'm not going to go into this in a moment, but there's a historical issue between Poland and Ukraine, where Ukraine was involved in a massacre of Polish people back in history, and the Poles have wanted exhumation of the victims, and this has been a bone of contention to the two nations. Zelensky has finally allowed there for Poles to try and bring this to some kind of conclusion. And this was a sticking point for further negotiations and further assistance from Poland to Ukraine. So Polish archaeologists and anthropologists will begin exhuming and identifying about 80 victims of the 1945 Puzniki massacre this April, allowing a breakthrough agreement between Poland and Ukraine. And that would be good. You want closure. You want that to be sorted out. Get that sorted out. Done and dusted. Accepted by all involved, and then move on, and then Poland will be much happier with Ukraine. Russia's secret $250 billion war fund threatens economic collapse, according to the ex-Bank of America vice chairman. Now, I reported to you the other day that the Russian government is forcing preferential loans to be given out to the military-industrial complex by the Russian banking system, but it is going to come back and bite the Russian government on the arse, I think. The Kremlin forced Russian banks to provide 210 to 50 billion, so 250 billion maybe, in preferential loans to defense contractors, matching its official military budget. And it could all be, on a precipice at the moment, the Russian economy. Gazprom, as an indication of this, is planning a mass layoff of its central office and a St. Petersburg branch. Allegedly, Russia's biggest corporation will fire almost half of its central apparatus staff. Another confirmation of the troubling outlook of the Russian energy sector this year. It is looking like it is in trouble. Energy is a cash cow of the Russian economy, but over the past 3 years, the sanctions have done their job. What used to be a massive stream of income is experiencing a significant slowdown. For all sectors of Russian energy production but oil, 2024 was a year of falling profits, and 2025 promises to further diminish these key funding sources for the Russia's war machine. The Russian coal industry is in freefall. The EU's total embargo has decimated exports, pushing companies toward bankruptcy and delaying salaries for months. In Kuzbass, one of the world's largest coal mining regions, workers have staged intermittent strikes demanding long overdue wages. Russian coal producers ended the year with a loss of about $770 million due to a combination of ever stricter sanctions, fall in exports to China, and logistical issues on the Russian railways and naval transport. The International Energy Agency is projecting that this sector will keep shrinking in 2025. By the most modest estimates, a 3% decrease can be expected too. Electricity generation is also under pressure, despite official claims as recently as July 2024 that electricity exports to China would continue to grow. Year-end reports reveal a decline driven by rising domestic demand in the Russian Far East. Overall, profits in the electricity sector dropped by 42%. Looking ahead, the domestic situation is set to worsen in 2025, with electricity bills for Russian households expected to rise by at least 12%. 3. Oil and gas stand out as outliers as a broader picture of falling profitability. Despite sanctions, Russian oil trade recovered and was 56% higher year on year than in 2023, but of course 2023 went down as of August. Overall, Russia's oil and gas industry showed very good profitability, over 41 billion US dollars as of quarter 3 2024. However, not everything was well in the blood oil kingdom, and it's worth noting that if that's below budgets, then of course that messes around with budget projections and how you're going to pay for things. The oil profits took a hit in October to November 2024 when the price of crude oil fell. Russia is very dependent on the high price of crude. Central bank sees trouble if it falls below $60 a barrel, while a lower price at $40 would cripple the whole industry, as it would barely allow Russian production to break even. As we heard earlier, the many nations in Europe want that oil cap to come down. Trump's campaign declarations, as well as the troubles with OPEC Plus deal, which risks falling apart if realised, it could create a very problematic scenario for Russian oil trade. Oil refining, unlike crude oil production, is in crisis. Several companies have cut down on production due to a combination of factors: high cost of crude, skyrocketing interest rates in Russia, as well as export restrictions. Some of them could face closure purely due to economic reasons. Ukraine's attacks on Russian oil refineries have also left their mark, and the successful strikes on key infrastructure and sanctions-induced difficulties in repairs, as well as economic troubles, have led to a 21% decrease in profits for this sector, and a trend will persist into 2025. And you look at the strikes that took place last night. If that can happen night on night for the next however long, then that will have an effect, a huge effect on the economic output in this sector. He continues, in January, the first closure of gas transit through Ukraine will be a major hit for Russian gas sales, so about $6 billion worth. The EU was still the biggest importer of Russian pipeline gas in 2024, and Ukraine's transit system was the main trade route, and the loss of a lion's share of the European market, the profits of Gazprom will plummet in 2025. Though the outlooks for Russian energy sector looks somewhat bleak, without strict enforcement of sanctions and expansion of restrictions against the shadow fleet, Russia will still make do. So still lots of work to do. But anyway, Gazprom lays the hammer, sacking half of its highest level staff and thousands of executives and company apparatchiks. And also we hear today that in Russia there are complaints about large-scale failure of communication operators and websites. Even payments in banks are not working. So I think the Ukrainian hackers have been doing a bit of a cyber job on the Russians of late. Okay, we're now going to go to look at US topics here. It has been a pretty information-dense video so far. I hope you will agree and appreciate. Okay, Euromaidan Press reports that Ukraine plans to send emergency teams to assist the wildfire crisis in California. According to Zelensky, the initiative highlights Ukraine's commitment to global cooperation, extending assistance beyond its borders despite an ongoing war. That's very much, I would have thought, a PR, not stunt, but it is a PR project to appeal to the Americans who might be somewhat less supportive of Ukraine, and showing that they are playing ball there and happy to be in support of the American firefighters. And we move on to the disinformation surrounding these fires, as this this disinformation report claims 8 Ukrainian generals' mansions were burned down in Los Angeles in a fire, as if like the military have all these mansions. Buzz Patson says, why do Ukrainian generals have mansions in LA? And then, of course, Community Notes adds, this claim appears to have originated on Russian Telegram propaganda account. There's no credible evidence that this claim is true. So why do Ukrainian generals have mansions in LA? And another source says, because that's not true. You fell for Russian propaganda, retract and apologize. And there you go. It's so worrying. Indeed, we hear the Ukraine is at fault. When train derailment in East Palestine, Ukraine's fault. Fires in Hawaii, Ukraine's fault. Hurricane in North Carolina, Ukraine's fault. Fires in Los Angeles must be Ukraine's fault. Donald Trump Jr. is one saying this. Ukraine has been given 130 billion, not including what they got from the 220 billion that went missing from the Pentagon's budget. It's all complete nonsense. But the people of East Palestine, Ohio, get nothing from FEMA. Joe Biden and Democrats hate your guts and will always put America last. And then he said, maybe if North Carolina identified as Ukraine, some of its incredible people would actually get some attention, resources and much needed funding for themselves in their time of need. Blaming Ukraine. America last, says Donald Trump Jr. Breitbart, Biden to send Maui less than 1/10% of what he wants to send Ukraine. And then, of course, look, oh, look, of course, the LA Fire Department donated a bunch of their supplies to Ukraine, Donald Trump Jr. So, jog on, mate. Jog right on. Keep running. Don't come back. Euromaidan Press reports that President Biden confirms that his primary objective following Russia's invasion of Ukraine was avoiding nuclear war. This explains everything. Of course, we know that it was all anti-escalatory. I'm critical of this because I think they calculated it wrong and they could have done more and they could have done it earlier. But 2020 vision in hindsight is always perfect. Vision in hindsight is always 2020, right? So whenever you look back, you're like, well, this happened, we should have done that. And of course, it's easy to say. Just bear a thought for those people who are trying not to engage in such activities that would provoke an actual nuclear war. So the anti-escalation management was, I think, miscalculated and did lead to much too slow deliveries of weaponry. But I guess we'll never know. It might have also saved a nuclear war, right? We don't know. They thought that there was a 50-50 chance of a nuclear war at one point. And so, given that, this is what I said the other day, if your metric of success for supporting Ukraine is not to is to prevent a nuclear war, then Biden's administration really succeeded. They did not allow a nuclear war to happen. Now, was it overly cautious? The only question is whether that was overly cautious. Did they miscalculate? I think they did, because every time we have got those weapons to Ukraine, Russia claimed that there's a red line and then nothing happened. But can they be, was this deeply irresponsible of the Biden administration? And I don't know. That's going to be a continuing argument. I think they got it wrong, but I do understand why they made those decisions. The strategy of the Biden administration was aptly described as killing Ukraine softly by newly appointed ambassador to Ukraine and of Ukraine to NATO. So a lot of people are meeting these comments quite critically, saying, well, actually, you screwed Ukraine over. You helped Ukraine. You helped more than maybe Trump might have helped Ukraine in the same situation. Trump's now taking over. It's going to be interesting to see how that goes. Biden has said we have united 50 countries in support of Ukraine. So if you remember back at the beginning of the war, Biden did do a really good job of going around the world and whipping up support for Ukraine. That was definitely an area where I think we can congratulate him. And not only in Europe, but for the first time, Asian countries have joined because they know what is happening with Ukraine, and it's important for them as well. So I will grant him that. Putin has failed to meet any of his strategic objectives in Ukraine, says Biden. Quote, when Putin invaded Ukraine, he thought he'd conquered Kyiv in a matter of days. He has failed thus far to subjugate Ukraine, failed to break the unity of NATO, and failed to make large territorial gains. And And if Biden wants to take some, plaudits for that, some culpability for that, then fair enough. I just think more could have been done, quicker than was actually provided for Ukraine. Trump said on Monday that he's going to meet Putin, quote, very quickly after he arrives in office next week. Trump said, well, there's only one strategy and it's up to Putin. And I can't imagine he's too thrilled about the way it's gone, because it hasn't gone exactly well for him either. That's the first time we haven't seen him criticize Putin, but it's the first time I've seen Trump say something slightly negative about the outlook for Russia in a way that isn't kind of just both sidesism. So usually he says loads of people have died, but they died on both sides. So his way of criticizing Russia, not so much criticizing, but stating how things are going, has been to do it to both sides. It's long overdue, but I just think he needs to be more critical of Putin and be very clear just to his own supporters in America that Putin is a bad guy, Russia's a bad guy. It goes back to this discussion about, that we are at war and needing to communicate very clearly to the American public in particular that what Russia is doing, what propagandists are actually saying, and how they are framing the United States and allies and Europe, etc., etc. Now, over to some American politics that pertains to the war in Ukraine, because at the moment, in fact, today, it has started today. Senator Majority Leader John Thune has privately told President-elect Donald Trump that he believes Pete Hegseth will have the votes to be confirmed as Secretary of Defense, according to 3 sources. This would be very worrying. Right, there are 3 particularly worrying, well, actually 4, I would say. Well, in fact, all of them, but particularly 4 people that I'm majorly worried about in positions of power in the Trump administration. Pete Hegseth as Department of Defense, he's massively unqualified. Senator Blumenthal said last night, if you put aside that he's got a drinking problem, is a womanizer, he's a sexual abuse case, that he was unable to even be in charge of 2 small veterans organizations without making them go into debt, right? If you put aside all of these things, having spoken to him, he is uniquely unqualified to do this role. Like, he doesn't have the chops to do the job. He doesn't have the skills. He's the wrong person, and he's got all these invalidating criteria as well. Or invalidating aspects to his application. It's just absolutely wrong. But apparently they are putting lots of pressure on the Republican senators to vote him in, and they've got a 53 majority. They've got 53 to 47 effectively in the Senate. So if all the Republicans vote for Hegseth, he will get through, and this will be a shame because he's not a fan of Ukraine in the way that he needs to be, and what he wants to do to the DOD looks rather like the kind of purge that Kash Patel is another one I don't agree with as in charge of the FBI. I think you've got an issue with Mr. RFK Jr. That was it. RFK Jr. in charge of health, HHS. And then the other one is Tulsi Gabbard, although we're going to come on to her in a wee while. Okay, so Ulrika Franke says, the quote, I think this is from The Economist? The Pentagon's annual budget, a little over $800 billion, exceeds the GDP of Taiwan, Belgium or Argentina. It's the largest buyer of fuel, the largest owner of ships, and among the largest employers on the planet. That is the DOD, and Pete Hegseth is going to be the guy running it, and he's got no expertise in anything remotely similar to that. And Applebaum says, this is coming from Jane Mayer, writing for The New Yorker, on the campaign to intimidate the Senate into confirming an unqualified defense secretary. Maybe the best article yet written about the tactics the new administration will use to control Congress, the government, and the media. This is all a bit of a problem. Quote, Blumenthal said, quote, it's been pretty unnerving for Senate Republicans because this nominee is so deeply unqualified and unprepared, yet they fear political retaliation from Trump if they vote their consciences. So it's not that the Republicans don't know that he's unqualified. It's not that there's a partisan divide on opinions on Pete Hegseth. There are Republicans who know he should not be in charge of the DOD, but they are being threatened in a way that means that they can't vote with their conscience. That is a problem. Now, this is going on today. There's ongoing discussion about what's been said. Shashank Joshi says Senator Roger Wicker opens a confirmation hearing for Pete Hegseth. Says to date, the civilian leadership has not built the Department of Defense to meet the moment, with Pentagon too risk-averse on technology. Wicker, quote, this nomination is unconventional, just like that New York developer who rode down the escalator in 2015 to announce his candidacy for president. That may be what makes Mr. Hegseth an excellent choice. Says will end with corrosive distractions such as DEI. Senator Jack Reed, the position of Secretary of Defense demands a leader of unparalleled experience, wisdom, and above all else character. Mr. Hegseth, I do not believe that you are qualified to meet the overwhelming demands of the job. Reed, another reason I'm deeply concerned about your nomination is your disregard for the laws of conflict and your support for service members who have been convicted of war crimes, including pardoning of military members who were turned in by their fellow soldiers and SEALs. So this is the support that Hegseth has given to to people who were turned in for war crimes, and he supported the war criminals and not the people turning them in. And that was from within military. They were fellow colleagues, military colleagues. I don't have a similar Hegseth says, I don't have a similar biography to defence secretaries of the last 30 years, but it's time to give someone with dust on his boots the helm. I've flex-cuffed insurgents, pulled out dead bodies, knelt before a battlefield cross. Well, yeah, I mean, well done. But does that qualify you to be in charge of the DoD and 3 million people? Hegseth goes straight on the attack. Our left-wing media in America doesn't care about the truth. All they were out to do was destroy me because I'm a change agent. Says he's not perfect, but saved by the grace of God, Jesus, and my wife Jenny. Jack Reed asked the SASC chairman Wicker for a second round of questioning. Wicker says no, we've had adequate time. Wicker then says he's seen FBI background check on Hegseth and that it was insufficient. Asked Wicker to allow all committee members to see it. Wicker says no. Wow. Reid says current military personnel have received emails with subject clean house, threatening firing for supporting Biden policies and describing them as traitors. Is Hegseth aware of these? Hegseth says no, but says as if it justifies emails, no accountability for disaster of Afghan withdrawal. Reid says Hegseth has been instrumental in getting pardons for convicted war criminals. Hegseth says, as someone who's led men in combat directly, I thought very deeply about the balance between legality and lethality. Says doesn't mean disregarding laws of war or Geneva Conventions. Hegseth said he defaults to the war fighters, not those in air-conditioned offices in DC, and Reid points out that those cases were adjudicated by military personnel who had also sacrificed, and that Hegseth had disparaged laws of war. And he asked Hegseth to define Jagoff slang, so on and so forth. And, it goes on and on and on. This thread is massive about, what people are saying and, what is going on with regard to the Hegseth appointment. So it's going to be controversial. It is clear that there are certain Republicans who don't want to put up too many obstacles to Hegseth's appointment, and that's deeply problematic. Now, if we go to Tulsi Gabbard, MSNBC reported last night that Tulsi Gabbard's DNI confirmation, so Department of National Intelligence hearing, has been delayed indefinitely, hopefully at least in part due to her chemical weapon attack denialism. This is where Tulsi Gabbard denied that Assad used chemical weapons. She visited Assad without permission. She is a supporter, it appears, of Russia, and she frequently has spread Russian disinformation through also quoting Russia Today. She is a compromised individual. Now, if her confirmation hearing has been delayed indefinitely, that's a good sign, because she would be an incredibly bad choice. Elliot Higgins from Bellingcat says, as a nominee for DNI, her rejection of US intelligence and promotion of conspiracy theories and Russian disinformation in relation to chemical attacks in Syria should be more than enough to reject her nomination. But we shall see. So here's Mueller, she wrote, saying, new Gabbard's confirmation hearing is being postponed because of paperwork problem. Yeah, I'll bet the paperwork associated with her FBI background check that needs to be fixed once Trump takes over. So there are claims that she didn't really pass the FBI background checks on her. Now, it is really worrying that we might be welcoming in a period of purging, and Hegseth would be part of that in the DoD, purging of federal employees. It's terribly worrying, says Phillips O'Brien. Once you start doing this, it's hard to go back. This is a Schedule F part of Project 2025 that was kind of saying that part of the agenda for Project 2025 was to purge the government of people who were not completely on board and loyal to MAGA Project 2025 agendas. So the incoming Trump team is questioning civil servants at National Security Council about their loyalty. At least some of these non-political employees have begun packing up their belongings since being asked about their loyalty to President-elect Trump. This is super problematic. It becomes a real problem when all the honest people with integrity flee. Those are the only ones who keep the corrupt ones in check. These people leaving means complete loss of checks and balances, no one to whistleblow or even inform the press of what is happening. It will be impossible for an incoming Democratic administration in future to not do the same thing. Now, as it would risk a civil service staff completely opposed to it. So this is the new normal. So you start doing this as soon as you get any new administration in. Civil servants are not apolitical anymore. They're, at least you might have your personal political beliefs, or you're going to work for the government. Now it's just going to be, right, your entire workforce is either Democrat or Republican. This is absolutely the wrong thing to do. Associated Press, as you know, Trump team is questioning the civil servants at the national security level. It's just it's deeply, deeply problematic, this. So you can go and read the Associated Press article, which, you know, looks in detail at what is going on and likely to happen right across the board, across the government. It's yeah. On top of that, there seems to be what I would call more corruption going on. Trump's inauguration will be entirely privately funded. So we already know that Meta, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, OpenAI guy, these people are paying, you know, Tim Cook from Apple $1 million each, and then Jeff Bezos another $40 million for a documentary, which is a way of getting $40 million to Trump. Trump's inauguration will be entirely privately funded, allowing it to avoid disclosing which people or corporations are donating. The lack of transparency creates the opportunity for him to pay them back in favors without the public knowing it. So there'll be policies put in place, enacted by Trump and his team, or executive orders written, and you won't know that they are only being enacted or written because Trump is paying back a favor to someone who donated him money. This is deeply problematic, and it gets worse. Now it's looking like the government is only going to help out states who are not only are they only going to employ people who are deeply supportive of the MAGA agenda, but they're only going to pay states who are Republican states. This is a worry that's been seen before. Trump tried to do this previously with California in 2016 to 2020, when he wasn't going to pay them money to sort out wildfires then, because he saw them as just a liberal mecca, when he was told, oh, actually, this many people in Orange County voted for you. And then once he realized that there were Republicans, considerable numbers of Republicans in California, he then gave them aid, whereas the Biden administration has done the complete opposite and just given out FEMA support and government aid to Florida, to North Carolina, to California. There is no partisan apportioning of support. Now, this is problematic because we've got Mike Johnson, the speaker, saying this.
Are you open to providing aid to California without any conditions at all?
Are you open to giving aid to California without any conditions at all?
Serious conversation about that. Obviously, there's been water resource mismanagement, forest management mistakes, all sorts of problems. And it does come down to leadership, and it appears to us that state and local leaders were...
In other words, so on and so forth. You don't really need to listen to it all, but he is saying, yep, aid will be conditioned. Reminder, there were 0 conditions placed on aid that went to Florida and North Carolina after Hurricanes Helene and Milton. To suggest there should be for California is deplorable. The new Republican-led Congress is already off to a horrible start. Lots of people talking about that they are the very worst. They flip out if Biden doesn't tweet fast enough, let alone condition aid on whatever they, as complete non-experts, think is the reason for the devastation. Republican Speaker Mike Johnson has announced that he is going to try and put conditions on aid sent to California. That's insane. John Favreau says, we've already got multiple Republicans in Congress, including the Speaker of the House, on records saying that Republican-controlled Washington will only help Republican-controlled states. Newsmax reports, why should other states be bailing out California for choosing the wrong people to run their state? Tommy Tuberville, Republican senator, says we shouldn't be. They don't deserve anything, to be honest, and with you, unless they show us they're going to make some changes. Conditioning aid is absolutely terrible. Now, Jeff Bezos talking about moving towards autocracy and the problems in America. These are the sorts of problems we've been worrying about in Russia. No freedom of speech, obeying in advance has been something that Timothy Snyder, the historian strongly supportive of Ukraine, has been saying for a long time. It's number one. It's like the first chapter in his book On Tyranny, which is a must read for everyone. On Tyranny, and then on Ukraine, really, really good. This is exactly what's happened in the US. All those people who have genuflected to Trump. Robert Reich here says, Jeff Bezos' Washington Post editorial board has endorsed Pam Bondi as a qualified and serious pick for Attorney General. Nowhere in the endorsement did they mention that she's a former Amazon lobbyist. So Washington Post, owned by Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon, Pam Bondi had lobbied for Amazon is being now endorsed amazingly by Washington Post. Billionaire control of our media is a threat to our democracy. Absolutely 100%. And to the point where you're now getting people fleeing the ship. The good ship Washington Post. Veteran opinion columnist Jennifer Rubin blasts the Washington Post while announcing her exit. So they've refused to publish satirical cartoons that have been critical of the tech bros, Bezos himself, and they weren't allowed to endorse Kamala Harris. Quote, Bezos bent the knee to Trump. Jeff Bezos and his fellow billionaires accommodate and enable the most acute threat to American democracy, Donald Trump, at a time when a vibrant free press is more essential than ever to our democracy's survival and capacity to thrive. She's now partnering with former White House ethics czar Norm Eisen, who've launched, they're going to launch a new outlook called The Contrarian. So you could get a complete collapse of the Washington Post. Now, Elon Musk is doing this as well, and Elon Musk just doesn't stop. 100% of everything he says at the moment is insanity on Twitter. He's really divisive, and he's attacking the UK, he's attacking Germany, he's attacking all the democratic nations, and not attacking Russia, and not attacking China. Why is this? Why is Elon Musk siding with autocrats against Democrats, like small d Democrats? Now, Adam Bienkov says British people now dislike Elon Musk more than ever, with more than 7 in 10 having an unfavourable opinion of him. Even Reform voters are now turning against him. So he is not very popular in the UK, but it's interesting when you see these sorts of things being posted. It's amazing when you look at the comments below them and all the trolls. The trolls are out in force in support of Elon Musk. It's incredible. Peter Duke says it's not just Elon Musk. Dominic Cummings is in constant contact with major Silicon Valley figures who are becoming increasingly anti-woke. Dominic Cummings, who is behind Brexit, is a really divisive figure, has a very bizarre ideology as well. If you read his writings, he was in government. He was the guy basically that got Boris Johnson into government and got leave over the line and Brexit done. But he is super not cool as a euphemism for being an evil bastard. He is the one, arguably, that's behind Elon Musk's attacks on the UK. And I've said to you previously that some of Elon Musk's writing have seemed very knowledgeable of British politics in a way that you wouldn't expect him to write in that phrase or add that thing or know that stuff. And now, Daily Mail of all people, front page article that it's Dominic Cummings who has been doing that with or on behalf of Elon Musk. Sources said Cummings and Mr. Musk were exchanging ideas via a WhatsApp group. These billionaires and oligarchs and seedy figures are just getting together in a cabal and trying to interfere with global democracies. In a WhatsApp group shared with an unidentified American businessman. It's absolutely staggering. I love this meme. So Amazon and Google and Meta and Microsoft and Apple and Uber and these companies that are donating all this money to, Jeff Bezos donating all this money to Trump and his inauguration. How much money have they donated to the wildfires and to helping out? Taylor Swift, how much did she give to Trump? 0. But $10 million to the LA fires and to help. So I love that. I think that tells you an awful lot there. Okay. And finally, an official has said the US Republicans in Congress have drafted the Make Greenland Great Again Act to propose the purchase of Greenland, per Reuters. The bill, backed by 10 congressmen, would authorize Trump to negotiate with Denmark on the acquisition, though we've heard from the 5 Greenlandic parties that they're not interested in being part of the US. Everyone's got their price, and it's amazing that we're going to bring down the cost of groceries, we're going to make things cheaper, we're going to literally bring down the price of stuff, which is pretty impossible anyway. And then he's backing all these inflationary policies, like getting rid of 15 million immigrants and tariffs on everyone. And then instead of reducing costs, instead of reducing the budget or the deficit, we are going to buy Greenland. How much money will that cost? 50 billion, 500 billion? What is the price of Greenland? And that's going to be an added cost. Now we know that Trump wanted a raising of the debt ceiling. And why did he want this? This is now pretty much well known that the tax cuts to the US rich are going to add to the deficit like they did when he did it from 2016 to 2020. Remember, he did that. It added, what was it, 4 trillion to the deficit. He's going to renew those cuts and make them even deeper. So the billionaire oligarchs are going to get even more money. And that will add to the deficit because you're not getting your tax income and so on and so forth. That's why he wanted the debt ceiling raised. And some Republicans who are against that, people like Chip Roy, voted against that. And so they didn't get it through. Congress didn't get that through with their budget. So the debt ceiling wasn't raised. That's really annoyed Trump because he wants to spend more money on giving tax cuts to his mates. So how they're going to afford to also buy Greenland, just when you're trying to lower inflation, it's insanity. So this is what's going on. America's going to be a fascinating place to watch, and then keep an eye on how this will affect Ukraine and whether all the chaos of Congress and all the chaos of Trump, 100 executive orders on the first day, Ukraine is going to be right down. Now, maybe the US can help Ukraine and it won't be on the big headlines because all this other stuff will happen. And that could be a vehicle to get aid to Ukraine. It could be a vehicle of the Trump administration to get aid to Ukraine in a way that's a bit quiet. Maybe they don't want to headline that they're helping Ukraine as much because they've been strong on not helping Ukraine and these MAGA opinions on Ukraine. So maybe the chaos will allow people like Walz and Kellogg to go about doing some stuff for Ukraine, or maybe Ukraine will just get fully sidelined in the chaos that will undoubtedly ensue in the next, certainly couple of months, I'd imagine couple of years, maybe longer. Anyway, let me know what you think. Take care. Speak soon. Toodle pips.